The first time I got pregnant was within the first year of our marriage. We had actually been together for about 6 years before we got married. We took a little while, but we knew we wanted to have kids and we wanted to get married. But we did get pregnant sooner than we expected. It was a surprise. We had been trying, and it seemed like it was taking a little while. I had actually gone to my doctor and had some tests run. I was about 35, so a little bit older. And they had actually suggested at the time that I go to a fertility clinic based on some of my results. But we were so new to the whole getting pregnant culture that we just didn't think it was necessary at that time, and we would just continue on our own. So we did get pregnant. It was still a surprise. It was great. It was wonderful. And then as quickly as it happened, it was gone. So with each of my losses, it was at about 10 weeks. So for a good 2 months, we were expecting that I was going to have a baby. And it was really hard to throw yourself into that idea of, what's it going to be like to be a parent, and starting all the planning and thinking, and then as quickly as it came, it was gone. And with the first loss, I really had no idea what to expect. I remember it was actually the day after Christmas. I was at work at a job that I really did not like, that actually caused me a lot of stress and pain. And I just quickly emailed my boss and said, I gotta go. And he said, okay. And I really this shows you how little I knew. I just stuffed a bunch of toilet paper in my underwear and got on the Metro bus because that's how I commuted to and from work. And I was crying the entire way home. And I finally got home and just went into bed and just wanted to stay there. I remember that, I felt some of the symptoms of being pregnant. I never felt very nauseous with any of my pregnancies. But you definitely, your body knows that you're pregnant. And when it was gone, I felt that loss. Like I felt like something was missing from my body. And that felt really, really tragic. And I think up until that point, I had lived a pretty good life of where I seemed to get almost everything that I wanted. This has been one of the hardest things that I've ever gone through. I set goals for myself, I achieve these goals. This was unlike anything that I had ever encountered before. And so we had that loss, we regrouped, we began trying to get pregnant again. But it took us more than a year to get pregnant again. One, because you're dealing with the grief of losing that baby and trying to get on footing again. Plus, it just takes time. My first 2 miscarriages essentially felt like a really long period. For 2 weeks, I was bleeding, and I just felt really gross and just wanted to take a shower every day. There was nothing I could do really to stop feeling gross and dirty, and that was really terrible. And what was also pretty shocking is that there really was no aftercare offered to me. Of course, I went to my OBGYN, and they did ultrasounds each time and blood tests to see where my levels were at, and make sure that I was clearing the miscarriage completely. And I was, and it was pretty traumatic to go through having an ultrasound when you know that there's nothing there and you're bleeding everywhere. Not fun. And then afterwards, they don't call you to check on you. They're just like, make sure you're not, going through a pad, every hour. Just make sure you're not bleeding too much. And that's it. They send you on your way. So that was pretty disheartening. But, that was the first time I'd ever been pregnant and my first loss. So we kept moving on, tried again, got pregnant again. And the second time, I think I just wanted to I remember that I really didn't even want to go to the doctor. I think because I felt like they didn't offer me anything before, so why go now? And when I had originally set out to become a parent, I really wanted some all natural experience, giving birth in a tub in my house. I think I was really idealistic back then, and after what I've been through, I don't know how I would. I don't think I could say I wouldn't have natural childbirth at this point, because I'm finding that it's just really difficult to even conceive a child and keep it in my body. So whether or not I have it natural is really not really not an issue at this point. But so the second time I just went about my day. Didn't really check into the doctor. I was starting to think about going to just make an initial appointment with my OBGYN around 10 weeks, when sure enough I started spotting just like the first time. It was very, very traumatic to see this occurring again. I remember that I was actually at a work conference at a fancy hotel downtown, and I used the bathroom, and I noticed that there was blood on the toilet paper. And just everything came rolling right back. Definitely felt like I was having to relive this trauma again. One is enough. One is enough. To have two, how could this be happening? It just seemed unreal. So that was happening. I just went back to the conference, tried to move on with my day, went back to the office, and I talked to one of my really good coworkers and told her what was happening. And I tried to, as I had said, I was making starting to make arrangements for where I wanted to go for my care, for my pregnancy care. And I had an appointment set up with a place, so I asked them if I could come in and get an ultrasound. They never returned my calls. It was all very messy. Eventually, I just got in with my regular OBGYN, which I think I really just didn't want to go back to them because of my first experience where they really just didn't give me any good aftercare. But I had already had everything set up with them. So we went through the whole process again of having an ultrasound. And if you aren't aware, they generally do a transvaginal ultrasound. So you have this giant foreign object put up your vagina so that they can make sure that all of the contents of your miscarriage have exited your body. It's really for your safety, but it's not pleasant. And it's something that as a woman, I think you just have to get used to. It's just one of the things that you have to deal with, which is really unfortunate. So like the first miscarriage, again, it was just a really heavy period for me where I was just changing a pad, every few hours. But it wasn't too much blood, so apparently I was fine. And I think that maybe my experience is not, I know that everyone's experience is different. For me, this is how my first two miscarriages went. It was just like a very heavy period for about 2 weeks and then sort of petered out. You see clots, etc., the material coming out of your body, but that's just how mine went. So then, the second miscarriage really rocked me. I knew that something was wrong, and I wanted to find out why. How did this happen? I think definitely all those same questions of what did I do wrong popped in my head immediately. Of course, they're not my fault. I know that now, but it's still intellectually, it's really hard to come to terms with that. I was having trouble concentrating at work, so I needed to find a therapist ASAP. I had never done any sort of therapy at all, so this was new territory for me. And I literally just went on Psychology Today website, looked for someone in my area that accepted my insurance, and who had a nice face. I thought, oh, this lady looks nice. Perhaps she will listen to me. And we hit it off, and it worked great. I saw her for 3 years, and I think it was very helpful to have just this outside neutral party to talk to about my feelings and try to work through a lot of the trauma and the grief. I think it was really difficult because I think what I was realizing is that people don't deal well with grief. I didn't have much experience with grief, except for maybe some older grandparents, relatives that had passed away. And even then, I don't think I really fully understood everything that was going on. This was grief like I had never experienced before, and I think that I didn't really fully grasp that this was a trauma to my body and to my entire life. And it really affects your relationship. My relationship with my husband changed. How I see myself changed. And I learned a lot of things. I think it made me think a lot more deeply about grief in general. And I think that something that I came to realize is that every one of us, every single individual out there has experienced some kind of grief or some kind of trauma, and we're all walking around with these griefs and traumas. I think that I was always a very anxious, a little bit socially awkward type of person before, and I think that affected some of my relationships. And I think really understanding that everyone is in the same boat and everyone has some hardship that they're dealing with has really helped me just open up as a person. I think that I'm able to just talk with people more openly now, which is good. It's been really difficult, though. Really moved me out of my comfort zone. I think I was more of a reserved person before, and now I've definitely had to advocate for myself. And I found that being direct with what I want and what I need is what's going to make everything easier. And I think as women, we really get socialized to think that we just go along with what's prescribed for us. And I'm finding that that's really not helpful for our mental health at all and who we want to be long term. I did just want to touch on my final miscarriage, my third miscarriage. I don't know if we'll ever try to have another baby at this point. I don't know if I really want to go through that. But the third one, so I was working with a therapist, which was very helpful. I had not gone to see a fertility specialist at this point. I was working with a naturopath, and she seemed very up on a lot of the fertility world lingo. I had also gone to a Resolve support group. That's a local, well, it's actually a national group, and there's different local groups that meet in Seattle. And I found that helpful, but it was also hard too, because I think a lot of people who show up at the Resolve infertility meetings they've never been pregnant before and are looking at doing IVF and other sorts of more invasive technological ways of getting pregnant. I was able to get pregnant after some time. I just was not able to keep the pregnancy. So it was always difficult for me to try to feel like I was, that I belonged in the Resolve group. There was some talk about maybe making a subgroup to talk about pregnancy loss specifically, and maybe that'll happen in the future. So anyway, the third miscarriage, let's see, how did that all go down? So we had been trying to get pregnant again. It did happen. It seemed, I honestly, I don't know if I can remember getting the positive pregnancy test. I think that the miscarriage overshadows a lot of that happiness, unfortunately. What I do remember is that, again, it seems like I always get pregnant in the fall time and then miscarry around Thanksgiving or Christmas. So our last few Christmases have been kind of not fun. And mind you, this has happened over the course of years. So I've had 3 miscarriages over about 5 years time in total. So with this last one, I instead of going the route of not seeing a doctor at all, like with the second miscarriage, I think I went overboard and I was working with the naturopath. I was talking to some midwives at a Northwest hospital to see what their perspective was. I was also seeing my regular, Western doctor, the OBGYN. I just wanted all their perspectives. I really wanted this to go right. And so I was doing all of the things. And really, I think it just sort of ramped up my anxiety, honestly. So because I was getting the constant monitoring, the feedback I was getting is that my HCG was not rising as it should. It should be doubling pretty rapidly. That wasn't happening. My progesterone was still fairly low, so I had to take progesterone supplements. But this time it felt different. I felt some of the nausea. I was having trouble eating, I wasn't throwing up. I've never been I'm not a throwy uppy person, but it was hard to eat. I only wanted to eat very simple foods. And so it felt like maybe this is our time. Maybe it's going to work this time. Third time's a charm. But unfortunately, again, it started out very similarly where I started spotting. This time we were watching my nephew and I started spotting, and we had to go to a friend's wedding reception, which was a fun, joyous time, but at the same time I was really worried that I was miscarrying because it was all the same signs as had happened before. And I went to go visit the midwives group, and they referred me to an ultrasound specialist. And that showed that there was no movement. Whereupon, previous examinations, we had actually gotten a heartbeat. So from all accounts, this really should have worked out, even though there were some signs saying that it might not work out. It was very touch and go, and it was really hard with that roller coaster, getting different information every couple of weeks about whether or not the pregnancy would be viable. So I started spotting again. They asked if I wanted to do a DNC, which is, a procedure where they go and they clear out the contents of the baby. And I had never had that before. It was something I had thought about doing so that they could potentially do some testing on the matter to see if there were any signs about genetic abnormalities, etc. Ultimately, I decided I didn't want to do it, and I just wanted to pass it naturally. I just felt like there was way too much medical intervention going on, and I just wanted to get out of it entirely. So I just allowed it to pass. Just went about going to work, and eventually it was on the weekend, and it was about 2 a.m. I started to have really, really bad cramps. I was using a hot pad to help with the cramping. I just had no idea what was going on, and essentially I was in labor. And I had never felt that before, and I had no idea that a miscarriage could be like that. My previous two were nothing like that. And I actually passed, I think, the bulk of the matter at around 2 a.m. And I remember calling my husband in because I wanted him to see it, to prove that it was real, that this really happened. And it felt very strange, very strange. And it was interesting. I was just talking to him about it again today, and I really can't remember what happened after I passed the bulk of the miscarriage. And that's something that I wish I had back, and I don't know why I can't remember it. And again, it's just a very, very traumatic thing to have happen, and I wish we could talk more about it.